And I want to thank all of you for the opportunity to be here with you today. I'm honored to be here, and we appreciate your service to this country. And what I want to do is go into a little bit of what's going on with the Veterans Committee, what's going on out in Washington. I also want to thank our State Commander Mirando. Thank you very, very much. And to Tom, I sure appreciate it. I was outside munching on some Burger King potatoes when Tom came out and said, "It's time for you to go." So I asked some of the ladies out there, I said, "Would you like to share my potatoes?" And they looked at me with horror, so I threw them away and came on in. The VFW is an effective and strong voice on veterans issues, and you provide invaluable service for both its members who have served overseas and for all of America's veterans. We are in this together. In the Veterans Committee out in Washington, it is my tremendous honor to have the opportunity to work with VFW leadership on a daily basis. And so your wisdom, your ideas help us to do a better job for veterans. The VFW, though, is a sacred family. You have defended freedom from one end of this globe to another, the same as is being done at this very moment. You have served, you have fought, and you have sacrificed thousands of miles from home so that we could be here today in Indianapolis. My dad, who served in the Navy, his cousin George. My dad was a World War II guy, and his cousin George, back in those days, we were primarily Irish immigrants, and so cousins and brothers all lived in the same apartment, about 6 deep in a room, and his cousin George went off to Europe. And George fought through Europe and was killed over there. And in talking to my dad, he said to me, he said, "Joe," he said, "I have my brothers Tom." He said, "But George was my brother too." You know, for some of you World War II vets who remember those days growing up, how everybody was basically taking a piece of toast and split in 6 different ways, as my family did. There were no cousins when you're all in the house together. You're brothers and sisters. And every year my dad, you know, on the date when his cousin George was killed in Europe, we'd sit there and remember him and say he was the finest person he ever knew, and that George was doing what he wanted to do more than anything else, which was to stand up for this country. As Americans, each and every one of us is able to enjoy the freedoms and the liberties we have because of those who protect and defend our nation. That is you. What have you asked for in return? Very, very little. You've asked for the opportunity to serve and fight for the love of our country, for the love of this wonderful land. We have wonderful young men over there and young women over there right now. In my home area, South Bend, Mishawaka, we have a National Guard unit, about 150 strong, who are serving over in Baghdad right now. And their duty? Convoy security. They're dealing with IEDs every single day. And you never hear a complaint. What you hear from them is, "How's my family? How are things going? How's everyone back home?" And I have to tell you a little story. You guys will probably enjoy this. So if you're an officer, you might want to close your ears for a second. This is for the enlisted guys. I went to see them in Fort Dix, New Jersey, when they were training. They had 2 months of training before they headed over to Baghdad. And so I wanted to go to Fort Dix to see them and say hello and spend some time with them. And so I got there on a Monday morning. We were voting that night in Washington. And I figured, New Jersey, Washington, that'll be about a 2-hour ride. And I kept driving and driving. But I got to Fort Dix around noon. And so I spent a couple of hours with the guys and the ladies. And we went all the way in the back. And you know, I showed up figuring I'll just drive to the back and be with the guys. And you know, they had 14 suits sitting up front when I walked in and taking me through the buildings. And I said, you know, I'd really like to get back with the fellas. And they said, fine, fine. So we went back, and it was probably about a 20-minute ride. And in the back of Fort Dix was an Iraqi village, just like they are in Iraq. And in that area back there is where our guys were training. And so I spent about 2 hours with them and, you know, grabbed some food with them. They were out on the roads doing training missions, going through the Iraqi village. And what they were doing was learning convoy security. How, as you drive along, you look and you see a tree. And there's a little something different than the day before. And they were being trained to try to pick out what looked different, because that's where the IED might be. And so they were learning recognition, all of those skills. And there were about 4 different groups they were broken down into, so I spoke to all of them, spent time. About a month later, I got a letter from one of the guys that said, "We sure hope you come over and see us in Baghdad." And I am going to go see him. But the letter was funny in that he said, "It was one of the best days we had in Fort Dix. The officers were furious that you came. You came in right in the middle of our training, and they had to drop everything, although you didn't know it. They were grumbling the entire time you were walking around, and all of us had a blast seeing them so miserable." He said, "We all, instead of having to go out," it was about 95 that day, instead of having to go out in the sand and sit in the Hummers for a while, got to sit down with you and eat some chow. We had a blast. They were miserable. That made it even more fun for all of us. Come back soon." So that's the spirit of the people we have that serves us. And let me tell you the best part about our National Guard. And that is the group that takes care of the families at home. It's VFW 360 in Mishawaka, Indiana. I was there 2 weeks ago for spaghetti dinner for the families. And we have an arrangement. We work with VFW 360. Our congressional office, we've mentioned to them that if these families need anything, you just let us know. And we'll work to help make sure they have whatever they need, so that their husband or wife or daughter or son who's over in Baghdad doesn't have to be thinking about it or worrying about it. And VFW 360 has literally taken care of everything.